No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, 5 days ago, I had an interview published with Ron Carucci, who is the author of the Amazon best-selling book, To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. And we've got a lot of really great feedback on that episode, on that interview, just in the few days that it was up. I had a great time talking with Ron. I could have talked with that guy for hours and hours and hours. I'm really passionate about the work that he's doing, and I think there's so much truth to it in terms of what makes leaders successful and what makes organizations successful. And so because of that feedback and because of the kind of the good traction we've gotten from that interview, for the next 4 Mondays, I want to do a 4-part series on the 4 elements of his book when he talks about what can make a company successful if they are really trying to double down on having a culture of honesty.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I agree with you. I think the feedback's been phenomenal. And the content to his book, I think, is it's one of those things you go back on and read over and over and over again and start to kind of put the pieces together. And I think the application of it being about how an organization can do this to how a leader can do this within their own business, I think there's a lot of overlap there and tie-togethers there. And I think that would be my hope, is that we can kind of break this down even more so for leaders to take it in and then consider how they show up for their teams to build the culture that they want to build.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So for the next 4 Mondays, we're going to talk about one of each of these 4 elements. And the words that Ron uses in his book are having a clear identity, how you hold people accountable, your governance, and your cross-functional relationships. And so for the first episode, for today's episode, we're going to talk about having a clear identity. And you know, in Ron's book, he talks about basically, in his words, it's be who you say you are. And that's such a almost a kindergarten way of saying it, but there's no better way to say it. There's nothing like just being who you say you are. I mean, we have almost a sixth sense when it comes, like human beings do, when it comes to seeing and feeling when someone is not that, when someone is not being who they say they are, when their actions and their words don't align. We see it in politicians, we see it in leaders, we see it in, sometimes our friends, whatever it is, there's just something that kind of like makes the hairs in the back of the neck stand up when you just kind of understand that this person that I'm hearing right now is not, that their actions do not align with who they say they're supposed to be. And the reason why that's important, it's almost evolutionary biology. It's survival. We are looking to other people and to dictate how we should act in a situation. And if you're talking about a work environment, you are absolutely looking to how your leaders are acting and how your company leadership is acting in order to decide how you should be acting. And in organizations where the culture is terrible, there's a reason why it's terrible. And when it's fantastic, there's a reason why it's fantastic. And so I kind of like this because it says that if you understand that this is what people do, then you have a lot of control as a leader over making sure that your people are kind of making their decisions rooted in a belief and a confidence in that they're making the right decisions because their company actually is who the company says it is, because the identity of the organization and the identity of the individual leaders within it, they align, their actions align with what they say they want to be. The whatever's on the mouse pad or the wall of the break room, the vision, mission, purpose, whatever you want to call it, that the actions actually align to that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also talk about, and we've talked about this a lot in the podcast and on other platforms like Clubhouse, but the true understanding and responsibility and like the fact that the local leadership and the leader of the team is the reflection of the larger organization. And I think that's where you can really have some issues in being able to build a culture like this, is that if you have an organization that is saying one thing and promoting one thing, and then you have local leaders that aren't living that for their people, that's where you can kind of get a little bit of a rub there. And it's then hard to believe that we truly feel this way about certain things that we put out, into the universe. However, how that comes to life from a leadership standpoint is also very, very important. So it's not that an organization or a company says, this is what we believe, this is who we are as a company, this is what's going on, and then you just robot whatever they say, or you just quote whatever is out there. You as a leader actually bringing that to life in your own organization amongst your own team is absolutely critical, not only for the identity of the organization, but for your identity as a leader. And then the culture in which you build around that, and then the shift of people's perceptions of what this culture is really about. So I'll give you a great example. I lived in California for 5 years, as you well know. And being in LA and, being somewhat kind of in the music industry and having friends that did stuff out there in the industries, I met a lot of people that would be big named people, celebrities, actors, whatever, musicians. And you meet them and you have this idea of who you believe them to be. Then you meet them and then one of two things either happens. Either they are very much as who you believe them to be and they show up that way and you're like, I'm impressed. Like how you are out there in public, is that how you show up in private? Or they are not who you believe them to be, and then you're really disappointed. Then you start to think of is anybody real? Is anybody actually who they say they are and who they actually are in this environment? And then so when people would ask me about oh my gosh, you lived in LA and you do these types of things and you ran into these celebrities, it's pretty cool, right? And you're kind of kinda like there's some people that I've met that I was really impressed with and I appreciated, and they were who they said to be, but the vast majority of those that I met were not. They would say one thing or come across one way and then not be that way when you had those interactions. So I take that and apply it directly to leadership. You can get out in front of a team, you can say some big things on a big stage, you can have a big meeting and talk about what's important to you and how you want to lead, but the interaction you have with the individuals every day is actually how you're defining your identity with them over the long term.
Yeah, that's such a great example. So first of all, I want to ask you, so did you give up? I mean, is that why you left California? I don't understand. Because clearly you decided that it wasn't right for you. So,
it was the fact that most people that lived out there spent a full-time career pretending to be somebody else and state taxes.
All right, I'll give you the second one. All right. I think you're spot on. Where the rubber meets the road on this for individual leaders, and where I can see it truly daily. I see this daily happen, and I think a lot of leaders struggle because they want to be who they say they are. They want their actions to align with who they say they are, and I think some of them feel like maybe whatever is in place doesn't let them. And so here's the example of where I see that. I'm a leader, and I'm being told. I'll go to a meeting, like a high-level meeting, where I'm allowed to be there, but my direct reports and 2 levels, 3 levels below me are not allowed to be there. And in that meeting, I get told that next month we are going to be rolling out a company restructuring where about 20% of the company is actually going to be let go. We're kind of realigning what our priorities are. We're kind of figuring out what positions are needed and which ones are redundant. And that's never a fun thing to do for the people who end up leaving the organization. But there is a period of time, be it several weeks or several months, where if you are one of the orchestrators of this and you have to implement it, where you know a lot about what's about to happen that other people don't know, and how you present things that you can't say to the group of people who's going to be impacted by this really says a lot about who you are as a leader. And so I've seen leaders get up there and say, and be very cryptic about it, be very, they're not candid about anything because they know that they have a fiduciary responsibility to the company. They know there are things they're specifically not allowed to say, but it comes off like they're spinning it. It comes off like they don't have the confidence to say what the value or the purpose of of the reorg is. And so they spin it as like, well, we're trying to make sure that we are we're aligning the best way we can with our customers. And like at some point you just have to say, hey, you know what, this is how much we spent on labor and this is the return we're getting on it, and we're looking at these positions and some of them just aren't needed in terms of what the vision of the organization is. This is the vision of the organization. This is the direction we're going, and some of these roles just don't make sense anymore. It doesn't mean you don't make sense as a person. It doesn't mean we don't like you. It just means that the current description of your job is just not something that we think we need. And this is the why behind it. This is the honest why behind it. I think people respond really well to hearing that. They may disagree with it. They may be upset about it. They may be emotionally, thrown into upheaval because of it. But that's very different than having them leave a meeting or a presentation thinking this person is lying to me. This person is spinning it. This person is trying to make me believe that they're in the same boat with me because their position might be on the line too, when in actuality, they're sitting in their ivory tower making these decisions and I'm the one who's being affected by it. If your people think that about what you're saying, you've absolutely presented it the wrong way.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And I think it's so important to think about, again, when you're talking about your identity and being authentic and being transparent, and also telling people sometimes that, like there are things and information that I have that I'm not allowed to share right now. And that's a part of the responsibility of the role. Here's what I can tell you, and here's what matters now, and here's some things that you should consider. But being that level of transparent, I think when you, as a leader, say that you believe in transparency, or your organization says we believe in transparency, like those are those times when you should be the most transparent. I think back to like one of the first episodes we ever did at Hacking Your Leadership. It might have been like number 3 or 4 or 5. We talked about compensation, and that was one of the most popular episodes, one of the ones that really broke us out, because in the dialogue we were saying like so many times leaders don't even want to have the conversation. Somebody wants to talk about, well, I think I deserve more money. And then they spin off into these excuses, and we don't really talk about that, blah, 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 versus just saying like, well, then let's talk about it. And let me give you some context into how these decisions are made. Let me give you some context into how these and when these decisions are made, and when you should discuss them, and how do you present yourself in conversations about compensation in regards to your performance, your role, like that level of kind of educating and dialogue and conversation in those spaces is, I think, what then allows people to say like, oh, well, if I can talk to Lorenzo or Chris about that, I could really talk to them just about anything, because that's one of those topics that a lot of people don't want to talk about or they avoid talking about. And if they're willing to have that conversation and teach me something and be very honest about it, then I can probably go to them for these other things. And so I think that, as you're defining your own identity as a leader, and you've also raised your hand to say, I want to be a leader for an organization and take on the responsibility of making sure that my organization's identity comes to life, you also have to be very aware of what is your organization's identity.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That's a responsibility that you have. I think a lot of people, you've said it many times before, is like why does the organization exist? Mm-hmm. And what are the beliefs, and what are the things outside of what's on the wall, what's on the poster, what's at the bottom of an email, signature? Like, what are the actual things that come to life in this organization? And what are we saying both to our people and to the public about what we stand for and what we believe? And then how do we make sure those things come to life? That's also a major part of leadership that I would ask all leaders to make sure that you're aware of when it comes to your organization.
Right. That's so true. One of the things that Ron and I spoke about in the interview that he says that he sees in a lot of organizations is this idea of having whatever your mission, vision, purpose statement is, be short enough to where people can remember it. And that's such a miss, because the words that he used in the interview was, what are you going to have a test? Like, is it you want them to be able to recite it on the fly? It's like, no, it's not about that. It's about making sure that you can look to something when you're going to make a decision, when you're going to say something to your people, when you're going to decide which strategy to use. You have to be able to look at it through the lens of whatever that thing is and make sure that it aligns with it if you want to be who you say you are. Now, what companies have done to get around that basically is they make that mission or vision or purpose statement sound really great, but it's so vague and so ambiguous that no matter what they decide to do, they can kind of shoehorn it into that. So to have a mission, vision, or purpose statement that is either impossible or so vague that you can kind of get away with doing anything, I think that's a miss that a lot of organizations make. And so I think if I'm a leader in an organization that has that kind of mission or vision or purpose statement where it's really, vague and ambiguous, it becomes my job as a leader to define who I am as a leader in more words than that. My journey to get in alignment with what that is and figure that out is different than my responsibility to make sure my people come along for that ride. So even if I'm working through that with my own organization, even if I'm kind of taking steps to talk to people to figure out what that means, that doesn't mean that I can't already start to say, hey, to my people, this is who I am as a leader, and define it with very specific things. This is what I stand for, and this is where you'll see it. This is what the kinds of values that I hold, and my actions should align with this. If you don't feel like something I've done aligns with what I'm telling you right now, I want you to tell me. Because I promise you, one of two things has happened. Either you're missing some context, and I will gladly fill you in so you understand why I made that decision, or I've done something that doesn't align with those values, and I want to, and that's a bad thing for me. I don't want that. I want to align with who I say I am. And so if something happens where I have not done that in a way, I don't want you to let that go and say, oh, there goes, that's Chris. He's not living by what he says he is. No. If that's happening, it's a mistake, and I want to fix it. And so it's those conversations with your people can happen independently of you coming along for the ride as far as what your organization is saying.
I think it's a great point. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1 Minute Hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get out a pen and paper, and I want you to write down the top 3 things that you would like your people to say about you as a leader. So if other people were to ask your people what they think about you as a leader, what would they say? And in an ideal world, you want them to say this, this, and this, whatever those 3 things are. Make them very specific things. Don't make them vague. Oh, he's a great leader. Nope, not like that. Specifically, the traits, the values, the way you try to lead your people and live your leadership life every day. How do you want that to manifest itself into actions that will allow your people to say these specific things about you? Write down those 3 things, and then I want you to go to your people, and I want you to ask them if there's anything that is preventing them from saying these things about you. Have honest dialogue with them around the things that you are making an effort to make sure that they can say these things, and invite them to give you feedback on if there are things that they've seen from you that don't align with these things. The more you can have these conversations with your people, the more you'll get to a place where they will start to say these things about you, and that transparency level will at the very least get them to make sure that they can come to you when they see something that doesn't really fit with what you say you're supposed to be as a leader, who you say you're supposed to be as a leader, and it'll allow you to take steps to rectify those things.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack, and I think to truly be able to live your identity as a leader, you have to define it first. And I think it's a great practice of writing it down and considering it and thinking about it. And like you said, how do I want people to think of me? What are the things that I want them to feel? What are the things that I want them to, what are the things that I want them to kind of resonate when it comes to my leadership and the way in which it impacts them in positive ways? I think getting those things down and then basically being able to check up on yourself is really a big part of your own growth and development. And again, when you're building that level of trust and loyalty over time, being so closely aligned with who you say you are with your people is critically important. And the other thing I like that you said is when you make a mistake and you're not aligned with who you say you are as a leader, having the grace and the relationship with your team where they can hold you accountable to that and bring that up and have dialogue to help you make sure that you're on the path that you want to be on, or the ability to provide more context or understanding or conversation or dialogue to help make sure that those things are aligned.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think we inherently as people know when we aren't who we say we are. We know it. We know when we're doing something that doesn't align with who our words have said in the past that we say we are. We ignore it sometimes because it's hard to face, it's hard to look at, but we know when it's happening. I will tell you that when I started doing this years ago, when I started thinking about what I wanted my people to say about me and then taking steps to have those conversations, it was so freeing because it meant I no longer had to have those moments with myself. I no longer had to have those moments where I thought, I'm about to do something and it doesn't align with who I say I am, so I hope nobody finds out. I hope nobody figures out that this doesn't align with who I've said I am in the past. Now everything does align with who I say I am, and when it doesn't, it's an accident. It's not anything where I'm thinking, it's not strategically, pulling the wool over anybody's eyes. And my people bring those things up to me, and we have those conversations. I think it's a great way to kind of put that bag of bricks down as a leader to be able to focus on things that really matter.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.